So our first question is about the role. Zackory, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the first question is about what you think the role. Do you see what role do you see for the foundations models or large scale pre-training like visual language models or diffusion policies in the deformable object understanding and control?
Cool. Who's on the panel, Julia?
Sorry. So there is Chuang, Yunzhu, and Ken.
Awesome.
Maybe it would be good if we could take.
Oh, okay. So I guess I can go first. I can give you just some preliminary thoughts I have about the benefits of this foundation model for deformable object manipulations. I see two major benefits. The first one is on the understanding about the dynamics of that object, and the second one is how to actually do the manipulations of that object. On the understanding side, the foundation model, what we realize, is actually very good at providing high-level categorizations about the type of deformation that object is. Is it elastic, like deformation, or plastic deformations? Is it rough, closed, or articulated objects? This kind of high-level recognition already give you the long way for you to do the actually identification and optimizations of your models. So on a high level, I think it's actually very, very useful. And on the second side is about the manipulation. So for many of the deformable object manipulation, it typically involves multiple stages, like I showed in the dumpling making examples. And the foundation model can actually be very good at providing high-level guidelines about planning and replanning of different action primitives for you to use to do your downstream tasks. So the opportunity I see are two things. One, efficient identification about those objects, and also planning and replanning. But more or less, all at a higher level.
The end-to-end, actually, they do everything. They also go all down to the low-level execution of the task and
Yeah, I just feel the performance may not be good enough or robust enough.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think we should first define what kind of foundation model. But there's many kind of foundation model. We can say large language model is the foundation model, vision language model is foundation model, and also diffusion. So video diffusion model also foundation model, and also maybe there are also some VLA is also foundation model. So for large language model, I'm not sure how will helpful for deformable. Probably for define tasks. For some of the robot jam we have been doing, like with the to define tasks, that could be useful. And for vision language model, I agree with you. Most on perception side, analysis, for example, affordance, and also the define property, whatever the kind of stuff. But I will say the most useful, I would say, actually is the video model. Because in deformable objects, we are so likely they have data, and the kind of video generation model, especially I think that the China has this kind of coding, something like this one. They are extremely strong on the deformable object manipulation from humans. I would say this kind of model can be very useful to project the trajectory demonstration part. And for VLA part, I'm not sure that how much VLA right now handle the deformable. Maybe the new type 0.5, they do some tasks on deformable that they even say they can. We have the data, they probably can do something like deformable manipulation, but most data side. Yeah.
I think that's a great point. With foundation models so broad, but I think video prediction models. I haven't played much with Cosmos, but I'd be curious to see how well that would work. But I think you're right, because it's seen so much video that it's probably capable of doing pretty reasonable prediction, which could be useful for maybe something like it'd be very interesting to look at laundry folding. I think this is the sort of canonical example as we've been seeing today. And the proof point is right now, physical intelligence has some pretty impressive results, I would say. And it's an interesting question about how general, how reliable, if they could start getting the quality of those folds down. Like right now, I was playing it one time to some students, and they laughed because they said, my mother would never let me fold. That would never be acceptable in my house to fold the laundry like that because it's pretty messy. So, but I mean, in my house, it's probably okay. But I think that getting the quality to high is exactly what Yunzhu said. I think that's right. Well, that's going to be an interesting challenge. I think also that the other part is that the VLMs like Gemini seems to be very good at recognizing elements in the scene. I mean, actually, right after I talked this morning, Sharon ran one of my examples through the new Gemini, and it showed that it could actually find. It didn't solve the problem. Actually, I looked later. It found 2 of the 6 crossings, which was a good progress. Let's put it that way. But I think it could probably be good at saying, for example, where are the corners of this shirt? That's actually an interesting challenge. I'd actually like to play with that and just be able to take images of laundry sort of thrown down. If it can find the corners, that's actually very helpful, because if you find those, then with a little bit of good old-fashioned engineering, you can straighten that. You can actually get folding accomplished. So I'm really interested in these hybrids. Now, for example, I'm curious if probably over at Physical Intelligence, or I know at TRI, they wouldn't be interested in that kind of hybrid right now. They want the pure form. But if you really wanted to make a company and get that going, I think you probably want to do that, at least for the time being, right, while you continue to collect data. So I'm pretty optimistic that they're going to find some use in manipulation of deformable objects.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's
Maybe Zackory.
Sure. I mean, if you wanted to go, and then I can finish off.
okay.
So
Maybe
it
just
sounds like someone. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's just about generating this kind of intermediate representations. Like we have actually do a lot of like different kind of visual promptings to prompting those vision language models. Currently, we realize it still have a lot of bias. It biases like a color, like for example, you prefer red over blue, prefer circles over some other shapes. Like probably it's just a problem of now. Maybe over time you will get resolved.
What model are you?
We're using like a GPT. Yeah. So like how you prompt those foundation models actually plays a very important role. Currently we use key points, like labeled key points that turn out to be the prompting that has the least bias. So we'll see what happens. That is about the detecting the corners, those kind of intermediate representations. I want to provide also another comment on video generations. We have also tried many video generation models. Like recently, NVIDIA released this kind of engine that takes in the image and also the language inputs. They're trying to generate the video and trying to retarget that motion to the robots. If you really look, like the result looks amazing, but if you really looking carefully at the results, the language instructions is actually very highly correlated with the visual observations. Like this type of model is actually not very good at being steered into handling other language instructions. So, but there's actually a lot of nuances. The task could be put the left mark on the right branch versus put a mark on a branch. If there's multiple marks and multiple branches, like this type of model are just not very steerable. That is at least our current observations. So video generation I think is good, but there's some very, very important like nuances people have to recognize.
Cool. I'll jump in a little bit. Sounds like there's a break. I mean, I think what everyone said is right on point here. A couple of insights I can bring in from some of our own work. One, I think going for like a hybrid approach really makes sense. Part of it is I'm not, if foundation models are things like, if SAM, SAM2 are counted as foundation models, those are awesome. And I think segmentation of cloth is a lot easier with these types of models. In terms of like LLMs, VLMs, right now, they're not up to the task, at least currently. We don't have models, VLAs included, that are just, off the shelf doing manipulation of cloth. I think at least right now, we're not at the point where we can replace simulation. I think simulation plays an important role beyond just these large data models. But with that said, I think they do serve a potential role, and I'm excited. And I think the community is just starting to get interested in looking into like, how can we use these models? How can we use a VLM to do things like manipulating cloth? I think, based on some of our own work, there is an opportunity in terms of like physical human interaction. There aren't good models to tell you right now, how should a robot interact with a person? I think things like VLMs and LLMs contain a lot of information, including information online of how humans interact with other humans, including physically. So at the high level, I think a lot of that information will be useful down the road, especially if we have any interactions with people in human environments and those sorts of things.
So maybe before jumping to the next topic, I'm gonna use the ones from the debate yesterday. For those that you were not there, like they asked about if it's data gonna solve robotics, and by my surprise, and I think I'm not the only one, the majority of people were at the no data approach. So like we need the structure, we need models, like maybe because that's what we've been working all our life, I don't know. But at the same time, the society or the hype nowadays seems to make us believe otherwise. So everybody's like fighting the idea that no, end-to-end no, but like maybe because we kind of see that it's working very well, or is it maybe not? Like, what do you think? Were you surprised about the fact that the vast majority of people voted for the not the full data approach?
No, but
Were you there?
Okay. I was there. So maybe I can provide with 2 cents, like very quick. The reason we are still in academia is because we probably still have some hesitations on those capabilities of those data-driven approach.
But why industry is so convinced otherwise then?
I feel there might be a selection bias. That's my point. So the reason why we are turning this economic, for example, I don't see many physical intelligence people here. I see some Google folks, but not many of them. They might be just head down collecting data and do large model training and see what happens. They have strong conviction, have a strong belief that this will work. They just work on it. They don't care what we discuss. They don't care what we debate. Model, structure, whatever, we're gonna just show it works. And the reason we are here is because there's selection bias. So maybe that is the reason. You are not asking the right audience.
No, but we all seem to be fighting against them. So it's like they really are having a big influence, I think.
right. Well, I think there's a little bit of a generational bias too, because you have a lot of old timers here, So they're voting, I think against it. I think it was also, I would say, a little bit of the framing of the question, right? Will data solve robotics, right? Which is, I think it was an all or nothing kind of statement. We could have reframed that a little bit, saying, well, is data important for robotics? And everyone would say yes, right? But and the other thing was, if we didn't say when, because if we had said within 10 years, we might have had a very different. So because I believe that it will solve in the limit, that we will. I can't believe it won't. Someday we'll have data-driven robots, and that's going to really solve a lot of things. The end-to-end, because I think what will be, I feel that may be very far off, well after my lifetime, but we'll bootstrap that with lots of other methods, hybrid methods, but then those systems will actually collect more data and they'll start getting better. And so once all that data in the limit, given that we as a planet last that long, that will ultimately win out. I can't fight against that. I think that would be foolish to deny that. So, on another end, you could make that argument. So, but I thought it's a good, healthy debate. People are still, I think you're right, that academics, we're still teaching classes, things like that. So we're sort of counting on the idea that there's something to teach.
And maybe add one story, a quick story, I'm actually willing and will be happy to be surprised by the effect of scaling. Like ChatGPT came out in November 2022. In September 2022, I was in the Bay Area doing my postdoc at Stanford. I met a friend at OpenAI. He's telling me, we have AGI. Like, I'm like, what? You were a Stanford PhD and you are telling me you have AGI? Do you know what you're talking about? And we are starting to have the arguments. Like, I'm telling him like why it doesn't make sense for us to claim AGI, any AGI in the robotics domain. And then in November the same year, 2 months later, I know what he was talking about. I see ChatGPT. Although, of course, ChatGPT is not perfect. Different people have different definition of AGI. But I would say I was really surprised by the performance of ChatGPT. And I think I'm willing to be surprised again.
Yeah, so I think, I also see the voting, also a little bit surprised that a lot of people don't believe data will be the thing that solves the robotics. But I can understand some reasons. For example, I think some of my story, I started my postdoc in 2018, and I worked with George Tenenbaum. You probably know him, that he's a strong against of all the kind of data. And for some reason, I think before, I worked on George Mark in 2020, 21. I think in the first 3-4 years, also I don't believe that data will solve the reasoning problem. And at that time, I think I worked a lot on neurosymbolic reasoning. It turned out to be usefully by now. So this is one example that to explain why that even at that time, even as ChatGPT 2, even 3, I also don't think data will solve the reasoning problem. But now I'm wrong. My reason maybe I'm in the East Coast. But I think that I know in the world we talk a lot on the neurosymbolic right at the time. But I think this kind of reason that that when you work on something that you probably, and also I think that the high demo, that people still feel this demo. No one actually had tried that model on your device. Or people had tried that, but it's still not that kind of generalizable. That people are critical about this one. But I do feel that because the essential is very simple for machine learning. So the most simple example is that if you have data you have seen that before, and you learn that when you're doing good job. If there are data you have never seen before, that you will not doing that well. Even you have very powerful algorithm that. Right now, I don't think there's an algorithm that, for example, you have a powerful algorithm and you have never seen the data, and there's another whatever deep learning model or either transformer, diffusion, whatever. They see the data, and this model haven't seen data can be better than the model that has seen the data. So I don't think there is that kind of algorithm right now. So that's my thought that the generalization probably is a little bit useful. If you have a lot of data, that there might not exist a kind of generalization problem at all. But you have seen all the data already. Yeah.
Do you want to add something? Or go ahead.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think one of the, I like this, and I like what Ken mentioned about how, we're gonna need a lot of data. Like if data is gonna win, we need a lot of data, right? We're not talking small amounts of data that one research lab is gonna collect. That is not gonna be enough. And I think probably a lot of people in this room are thinking of, how do we get robots in people's homes, right? That type of like unstructured environment. If it's, industrial settings, that's a different ball game. We can probably get enough data in those things, right? There's a lot more structure. But in the people in the home, in human environments, getting the amount of data we would need, at least currently with current trends, we're talking we need millions of robots deployed, all collecting data, sharing that data to build these massive models that can work in these environments and structured environments, solving lots of different types of tasks. The problem with that is, how do you get millions of robots deployed? Well, they already need to be good enough to do things to warrant them to be deployed. So it's kind of like chicken and egg problem. Like, how do we get, if we don't already have the data to train these robots to be really good, then we need something else to get robots to be really good so that we can deploy them at scale to get to that data to then train them, right?
Okay, let's jump to the next, it's a little bit more centered in deformable objects. So the next question is about, what do you think is a more promising application for the deformable objects manipulation, both in industry and in daily life? And what do you think are the techniques that we still need to unlock to be able to realize this?
Well, the big one, so the big one I think is laundry folding. I mean, that's really useful because it could be useful in so many things. And in homes, I think it's also nice because it's a little bit fault tolerant. You don't need to go super fast because the robot could work for a couple hours on that, while you're off at work or something. So I do think that would be something a lot of people would like. And senior citizens, I mean, it would be really nice if we could crack that one. And in industry, there's sort of an analogous thing because there's a lot of things where like folding napkins or folding tablecloths, or in hotels, folding towels, right? There's a lot of that goes on, and that would be hospitals, exactly, yeah. And making beds would be nice, I think, if you could do that. I mean, if there's a home level, which would be like, pretty low quality, but obviously hotel is another level, but there's continuum, so it would be nice. Those things, actually, I do think we can make progress. It may be, again, a little bit of a compromise where we put some, maybe the markers on the corners of the towels at the hospital, right? That could be very easy to do, right? That would help it along. So I think we'll see that in the next decade.
Yes, in clothes folding and the laundry folding, that's definitely a very good example. I can maybe add one, which is like cable, like a rearrangement and cable, can have a lot of work on cable manipulations. And I've also chatted with many industry collaborators, and they are also looking into this type of problems, like how to do automatic organization and routing of those cables, especially in very tight space with some specific configuration of the environment that can potentially be very, very complicated. So I would argue those scenarios can be more controlled, potentially more controlled than clothes folding, because if you're working in hotels or homes, I think those kind of industry like a pipelines, possibly you have more power of changing your environments to make it more friendly and more compatible with your robots. Although it can potentially be more complicated, depending on your task criteria. But in those scenarios, we probably can also see some potential applications.
I would like to provide some different perspective. I think everything in home will be very hard to be really used. I would say, for example, I do agree that for example, laundry home, that could be very good user case. But the fundamental question is that how much people want to pay the kind of home robot and put in your home and doing the laundry or whatever food for you. So like that kind of, for example, that kind of so I would say like 5 years. And that's my guess that have home robot in home that even longer, I would say. But I feel that is something that having mild here, I would still say probably will be some urban scenario. But then you have a robot dog that can doing some navigation in fluid, in soft terrain, doing some kind of outdoor activities. That part I can see that there are many immediate activities that and also what they need, and relatively easy to convince for the military to buy some robot doing some simple tasks and soft terrain or some manipulation. So I think that might be relatively easy path to really get there.
Nobody has talked about specific dressing, so it's your turn.
Well, that's even more far into the future. There's additional challenge with the human interaction, but I think there are a couple of areas where we're going to see adoption earlier rather than later. I think hotels and hospitals are going to be possibly big adopters, only for the reason that they're at scale, right? They're doing thousands, tens of thousands of bed sheets, garments every week, right? They have the scale where it could make sense monetary, from a money perspective. The other area where I could see it, where other adopters, and this has probably to start off with no autonomy, is individuals with disabilities, especially loss of hand function. There's millions of people in the US that have lost upper body motor impairment for a whole whole host of reasons: ALS, multiple sclerosis, ALS, spinal cord injury, tons and tons of neurodegenerative diseases, tons and tons of causes where they need care every single day. And having a robot that they can control to do these things, I think we will see as an, and that includes cloth manipulation, right? And food manipulation, all sorts of things, because it could potentially give them an opportunity to do something they can't do currently without asking someone, right? It's giving them a capability back in their life to be independent, to do things in their home again for themselves. And that might not have any autonomy to begin with, but it could pose as a mechanism for collecting data at scale to start then adding an autonomy.
Yeah, that's true. And now they can even do it just guiding by language. So I think that's totally option. Yeah, so I think we could, let me add maybe that it hasn't come up, but it's also very important, I think, the inverse logistics. All this fashion industry that now we shop online, we try clothes and then we return them, who knows in what state, and they need to fold them back and put them. So I know that this is also a quite controlled scenario that is also important.
Yeah, actually, let me add. I saw from one place that they have, for every garment, they have a very specific folding instructions.
Yeah.
And it's very detailed. Yeah. And so they have like thousands of different ways, and you have to memorize, or it's very complicated. So they wanted robots to do that because they're doing more of this online.
Yeah.
So they get these garments and they have to fold them for shipping in a very specific way. It's different than putting them on the shelf because it's going to get crushed too much. So it's a really nice
For packing, but for packing also, like when they return the package.
Yeah. To
They
repack.
also need to check that everything is
That's
okay.
inspection. Yeah, that's a nice one. Totally. That's good.
Okay.
Should we ask one quick audience question just for time reasons?
Yeah, okay,
I don't want
yes,
to
of course.
So we work with deformable objects, and one of the challenges it introduces is the many degrees of under actuation it has. But I think it also introduces opportunities to make the manipulation easier. To use like the robots of the Lost Ark example, in your paper you showed that when you first pull the cable and make it straight, the movement becomes more predictable. And so my question is, and there's like infinitely many different ways you can prepare the object. How do you think we can bring this intuition into our robotic algorithms?
Well, I thank you for pointing that out. Actually, I even forgot about that too. But you're right. One of the things we were trying to cast, kind of a whipping effect, and then we found that if we straightened up the cable, that would make it much easier because you have an initial start, you have reset in some sense. It's a great point because as you said that, I was thinking when we do this thing, actually goes all the way back to when Peter Beale was doing laundry folding, but he would pick up the garment and then turn it around to find the lowest hanging corner. And it was just using gravity in a really similar way. It was really smart. So I think there's tricks like that we'll come back to. And I also want to mention in Ralph D'Andrea's talk yesterday, he said something kind of went by fast, but I've been thinking about it a lot. He was talking about that thing with the marble, that they played that game where you have to move that marble past all those things. And he said, you could build a model for that, but it was so complicated, right? But it would be so hard to do. But if you just play the simple thing, but basically RL found all these tricks to do it. So I think there's a lot of tricks out there that humans kind of are unconsciously using, and maybe we can, RL will allow us to discover. So maybe like good simulators, these tools will get us to be able to start being able to discover those things.
But Rodriguez also said the operation is not natural, and that he's worried about that. That maybe the data is like we use these efficiency because we need to think so much.
Okay.
I can maybe add a little bit, I totally agree. I can add a little bit specific to 1D deformable objects. I think there are results from Tim at the UIUC. He provided results if you, for example, do bimanual manipulations of cables. Like if, for example, your end effectors, you are gripping the cable, and if you are somehow in a specific configuration, there are only a limited numbers of possibilities of how the cable will look like between those two fingers. So somehow, maybe sometime manipulation will just naturally reduce the possibility, reduce the degree of freedom, and make your problem easier. Yeah.
Actually, in terms of that, I'm thinking that whether the kind of VLA can have the kind of intelligence that can reason about tool use, reason about multi-stage that kind of, but really hard to turn common sense. I don't know. I think it's hard, but maybe we have some channel thought, and also maybe have some the kind of pattern scaling that you can have a mental model to imagine many possible paths and see which one is best. I don't know, but seems we are not there. But it could be interesting research direction for everyone. Doug?
Do you want to say something?
Oh, the mic has gotten a little muffled, so I could only hear bits and pieces there for this question. So I'll rely on my co-panelists to have answered this one.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Do we want to another question or?
Oh, one more question right there.
Depends on how much time do the panel have.
Okay, we're good. I'm around.
Thank you for the nice discussion. So my question is, what's your perspective on manipulating deformable objects while maintaining contact with the environment? So that seems to be quite interesting, at least from the control perspective. You have a few words. Thank you.
Could I ask a slight follow-up question to this, which is, what do you mean by maintaining contact with the environment? Do you have like an example you're thinking of, maybe to help ground?
Let's say you want to attach to parts, like the sole of the shoe and to the remaining part of the shoe. These things can help in, let's say, remanufacturing processes, which can be quite interesting for deformable object manipulation, or even detachment tasks.
Or with human bodies there.
Yeah, there is also placement of carbon fiber. It's also one case is the deformable.
Yeah.
They need to put it on this border.
Yeah.
So maybe I can provide one like perspective. Like first of all, I don't have a solution to your problem, but I can maybe provide one perspective, which is if we just rely on, for example, vision language action models, currently what we observe is that it just doesn't give you this 100% reliability. Like no matter how much data you collected, if you just do imitation learning, there's a ceiling in what type of success rate you can get. So then the question is how to bridge this type of remaining gap. So in that front, I believe simulation could be very useful and will potentially be the solutions. So my current imagination about how we can achieve very reliable real-world manipulation will be some combinations of imitation learning plus reinforcement learning. And then the question of, do we want to do the reinforcement learning in the real environment, or do we want to do the reinforcement in a simulated environment? Like obviously, real is actually quite painful. Like there are some words might have been trying something, but just doing reinforcement in the real environment is quite painful. Then there's a simulation, and obviously that will be sim to real gap. But sometimes sim to real gap matters. Sometimes sim to real gap doesn't matter that much. We know like in locomotion, sim to real gap may not matter that much as long as you randomize enough. So in that regards, I would really hope we can build some simulations that can encourage this type of behaviors that, for example, deformable object manipulation, why we have to maintain contact or breaking contacts, and that can help us to make the policy more robust and finally deployable in the real environment.
Yeah, so this is also a good question. I think right now, if you look at the LM phase, actually they have the kind of pre-training, mid-training, post-training. Right now, I think 2 or 3 years ago, probably people most focused on pre-training. And now I believe OpenAI most focused on the post-training. For the robotic fundamental model, I think we haven't touched about the post-training yet. But this could be extremely critical for real user case. The same for the ChatGPT. For example, when we do that kind of GPT-1, GPT-2, it doesn't raise too much attention, right? But it really brings attention to the ChatGPT moment. And they highly rely on the kind of post-training. So this is my imagination that probably right now we are on the pre-training phase because we don't have enough data. We are still strong on part. But in the final end, I think we should have a post-training pipeline for the kind of robotic foundation model. Yeah, the reinforcement learning definitely will be an answer, but that's why when I mentioned about Genesis, I think one perspective is Genesis build and also separate Genesis runtime. the runtime, I think, is also is a thing that they have to have a kind of simulator. You can define all the kind of physics feedback, task feedback, safety feedback, all within the simulator. So that's why we'll see Genesis runtime will be something we are thinking about the post-training pipeline, similar to the kind of LM post-training we rely on like the RHF or AI whatever kind of stuff. That I think that would be a critical component for taking the kind of web foundation to the real world application, but we are not there yet.
Question? Are we open question?
Well, yes, we do another one. You have time?
Okay. Well, I bet everybody's going to be getting tired. But
Yeah.
maybe one more. Final one. Yeah.
No pressure. All right. I'm gonna put on my, this guy is crazy hat. The noun that shall not be named, I think our remote expert uttered it once. And that is the noun that should not be named. Food, commercial and home kitchen work. Any possibility within our lifetime for robotic?
Sure, you will have enough data.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good topic right before we break for dinner. No, that's great. I think, there's one meat packing, which is a big one, a big application area. You're thinking about application areas, and that's where you have to, process chicken or something like that, and there's cutting.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's in cold environments, so workers get a lot of injuries, and it's very unpleasant work. So having robots for that, I think there's definitely a market for that too as an application. Probably a lot of food prep. I mean, it's interesting because at scale, and very, very high, like production, that already happens to a large degree, right? A lot of food prep is food processing and prep is done in large scale industrial kitchens, making all these products that we buy. But, I think in the home, my feeling, is that, I don't know, I don't really want a robot to cook dinner for me. I mean, that's me. I don't. What? You do? You don't like cooking? Okay. How many people like cooking? Yeah? Okay. See, a lot of people like to cook. So I wanted to clean up. It'll be good to clean up. But I don't know if it would cook. I don't know. What do you guys?
So yeah, can actually touch upon like the two lines of applications. One is trying to do this kind of like a pipeline, like industry, like a pipeline where you have like food, like a foods. We actually have chatted with at least two, like those kind of food preparation companies. Currently, they mostly have been doing just computer vision problems. They are doing, for example, like some like, is it still good? Do I have to throw it away? What's the overall geometry? How can I pick it up? So in many of those scenarios, it's mostly computer vision problem. I think it might be similar to MD robotics, cognitive AI, many of those problems, where many of the motions have been like somewhat hard-coded. I think in many of those scenarios, I think it's already there. Like there's already companies that are doing those applications. Then it's about those kitchens. Like nowadays we see a lot of like robot kitchens, and robot kitchen is essentially an automation problem, like not a robot learning problem. Like essentially how to design the kitchen in a way where you can have food like moving back and forth, those kind of like self-rotating pots. I think in that regards, it really narrows down to ROI. Like are you getting your investment back or not? So that is also already somewhat deployed. And then it's about the robots really working in our kitchen. I think we are actually very, very far away from that. Because like Ken mentioned, like if just do like a laundry folding, if you fail, it's okay. But for foods, if you fail, cleaning can be tough.
Yeah, I somehow agree with that one. So it's more like a question about like how much general data you need in this hunt. If you just put them in some industrial setting, you don't need the generalization. I think we are already there. And it's more like a curve, how much generalization you need, and how much we are close, or how natively close. So, I'm pretty negative about the home robot. So I don't know for what reason. I just feel it's too far away. And also I also have And also there's some question about humanoid that people say, a lot of people work on humanoid. Actually, I have always asked the many investors to ask me how I think about humanoid to talk with you. I just imagine that if some people told me, okay, we have a GPT level humanoid robot and they can do talks for you, do I want to take it? Probably I would say no. Do we want this robot to carry me to take care of my baby, take care of my mother, father? Well, I would probably say no. Even they are, but there are even great idea. They say they kind of for unit they kind of locomotion the robot can be useful. That I would say that even I'm a human, so human maybe sometimes I will fall down. Okay, I can get up, but if there's a robot that fall down, my floor will be broken. So I think I would say home setting I would still say that end up preparing still hard, both in technology and ethical.
Yeah, I think a lot of food prep, food cooking has already been automated. It's been automated for decades, but not in the home. In the home, I'm not sure, maybe kind of as Ken was also mentioning, I'm not sure there's a market for it. But with that said, I think it's also still a cool research problem. And I think the reason why it's a cool research problem is not necessarily because we want to turn it into a company and sell it, but more so because it's a hard problem to solve. And a lot of the technologies, and I'll say this with the fact that I don't work on robotic food cooking prep stuff. So I don't have any current horses in this race. But I think a lot of what's interesting about it and what's maybe promising about it is that the technology that we as a community can develop in that will hopefully be usable for other application areas as well that might have a immediate or near term commercial perspective.
I just want to add one quick note, another word, because you just said automation. So I want to say there was a great point that Animesh Garg made the other day, and I really like what he said. It's paraphrasing an earlier point, but it was that 1 humanoid is robotics, 10 humanoids is automation. And the point of that is that once we start scaling, that's when all these other issues come up. And they're just as scientifically challenging and complex, which is how do you make it reliable? How do you make it cost effective? How do you make it efficient, right? Those are all going to be starting to come into play. And so, so let's keep, let's keep in mind, automation is a good word.
So let's say the panel.